Let's be honest. If you're someone who prefers to skip a shower now and then, you might imagine you'd fit right in during the Middle Ages. After all, isn't that the era we picture as a time of mud-caked peasants and unwashed nobles, where bathing was a rare and suspicious luxury? But history, as it so often does, has a way of surprising us. Welcome, fellow time travelers. Today, let's journey back to the medieval world, not just to peek at castles and cathedrals, but to explore the everyday rituals of cleanliness, the ingenious and sometimes odd ways people fought filth, and the real story behind medieval hygiene. Imagine slipping into a medieval tunic or lying down on a straw mattress. Chances are, you'd soon be scratching. Lice and fleas were the constant companions of rich and poor alike, infesting clothing, bedding, and hair. Even the most pious monks and the wealthiest lords weren't spared. Saint Francis of Assisi, in a moment of spiritual humor, once called these pests the pearls of poverty. Combating these unwelcome guests was a daily battle. Women armed with small brooms would sweep through hair and garments, often near windows or fires where the light and warmth helped in the hunt. The goal? To rid heads and homes of these bloodthirsty intruders as quickly as possible. If you think the tap water in your city is questionable, spare a thought for medieval townsfolk. Rivers and streams, the lifeblood of cities and castles, were often choked with waste. Everything from household garbage to, well, less mentionable refuse. Wells, too, could become tainted as growing populations contaminated the groundwater. Some cities, like Siena, tried valiantly to regulate access to clean water, but with little success. The result? Many people turned to beer and wine as their daily drink. Not just for the taste, but because it was often safer than water. Water, in fact, was considered a drink for the poor, and its impurity was widely feared. In some places, rainwater was collected in cisterns. But this was a luxury for the wealthy, and even then the water was not always safe. But don't think medieval people ignored dental hygiene. Far from it. Cleaning between the teeth was a must, even if the tools were a bit rustic. The first toothbrushes were often hazel twigs, one end wrapped in cloth. Some chewed on marshmallow plant roots, mint leaves, or fennel and anise seeds to freshen their breath. Others rinsed their mouths with water or even wine mixed with vinegar. A medieval mouthwash, if you will. There are even records of tooth powders made from crushed herbs, salt, and sometimes charcoal, which people would rub on their teeth with a cloth or finger. Bathing in the Middle Ages was rarely a solitary act. Public baths, rivers, and streams were common gathering places. Even private baths in castles were elaborate affairs, requiring teams of servants to haul and heat water. Once the tub was ready, it was not unusual for several people to take turns using the same bath water, sometimes with an attendant on hand to ensure no one bathed alone. For women, hair washing was a weekly ritual, often reserved for Saturdays. The process was a team effort. One would pour water from a jug while another scrubbed with a homemade shampoo of oils, herbs, and minerals. Peasant women washed their hair less frequently, but the method was much the same. In some regions, bathhouses were as common as taverns, and people gathered there not just to get clean, but to socialize, eat, and even conduct business. In fact, in cities like Paris and London, bathhouses were lively social centers, sometimes so lively that authorities tried to shut them down for being too rowdy or morally questionable. Soap in the Middle Ages was a far cry from the perfumed bars we know today. Recipes varied. Some used a mix of lemon and salt to create an alkaline cleaner, while others combined wood ash with lard or olive oil. Northern Europeans favored animal fat, while those in the Mediterranean preferred oil. The wealthy might enjoy scented soaps shaped into balls or bars, but the poor made do with harsh, lye-heavy versions that could strip the skin as easily as they removed dirt. Soap was often made at home or by local soap makers, and the process could be smelly and labor-intensive. In some places, soap was so valuable it was locked away and used sparingly. Surprisingly, medieval scholars took hygiene seriously. The Faculty of Medicine at Salerno, one of Europe's leading medical schools, published guides to healthy living as early as the 12th century. Drawing on ancient Greek, Roman, and Arabic texts, these guides recommended washing hands and face with cold water each morning, stretching, combing hair, and brushing teeth, habits that sound remarkably modern. Monasteries often had running water and even primitive forms of indoor plumbing, with pipes made from lead or hollowed-out logs. Some monasteries built elaborate bath complexes for the sick and elderly, and the word spa itself comes from the Belgian town of Spa, famous since the Middle Ages for its healing mineral springs. Of course, not all medieval hygiene practices would pass modern muster. Perfumes and scented sachets were popular ways to mask unpleasant odors, and people often carried pulmanders, small fragrant balls, on their belts or around their necks. In winter, when water was scarce or frozen, dry washing with cloths and powders was common, and changing into fresh linen was considered almost as good as a bath. Even the humble act of hand-washing had its place in medieval etiquette. At feasts, a servant would bring a basin and ewer to each guest before the meal, and washing hands was a sign of good manners and respect for others. Toilets, too, were more advanced than we might imagine. Many castles and monasteries had garderobes, stone or wooden seats built over chutes that emptied into moats or cesspits. In cities, public latrines were sometimes available, though they could be unpleasant, and chamber pots were a household staple. Waste management was a constant challenge, and city authorities struggled to keep streets and waterways clean, sometimes issuing fines for dumping refuse in public places. So was the medieval world a cesspool of filth and disease? Not quite. While their standards and resources were different from ours, medieval people cared about cleanliness and developed creative ways to stay healthy. Their world was one of constant adaptation, where the fight against dirt and disease was as much a part of daily life as prayer or work. Next time you grumble about having to shower or brush your teeth, remember, you're part of a long, inventive tradition of humans striving for cleanliness, even when the odds and the lice were stacked against them. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, share it with a friend and keep your curiosity alive. History, after all, is full of surprises, sometimes even in the bath. And perhaps the most refreshing fact of all is that across centuries and continents, people have always found ways to care for themselves and each other, proving that the pursuit of cleanliness is as old as civilization itself.